as I'm going through this, make sure you are also checking yours, fixing them if need be on the quiz itself, on a separate sheet of paper, whatever. Those of you that were not here or didn't get a chance to finish, you should definitely be paying attention. Unless you got A's, B's, or maybe C's, everyone should be paying attention, not on their phones. So G, make sure you're paying attention. So for number 1, you have to find an equation that is parallel to the one that is given. So if it's parallel, the slope is the same. So you would write y equals 5 over 2x and then pick a different y-intercept. You can make it negative, you can make it a different number, it just cannot be the exact same. Because that would be the exact same line. We don't want that. Two is similar. If it has to be parallel, the slopes have to be the same. So it means it's going to look similar because the only type of equation that has the same slope is another y equals equation. So you can make that a positive 4, a different number. You just can't make it the exact same. Questions on those two? Number 3, you're now doing perpendicular, so your slope is changing. Take it, flip it. If it's negative, make it positive. And then you can keep the y-intercept the same. You can change it. It doesn't matter. And then same thing for number 4. All whole numbers are really over 1, so you're going to take it, flip it. It was positive, so we're going to make it negative. Each of those were worth 1 point, getting the correct slope, and then having either a different y-intercept for the first 2 or just a y-intercept. Questions on those 4? Five through 8 were all worth 2 points, doing the work and then the answer. For 5 and 6, these are both parallel, so you need to know that the slope is going to be the same. You don't need the y-intercept that they give you, so if you want to cross that out, you can. That way you're not tempted to still use it again. And then you're using your point slope formula. Y minus 1 equals negative 3 over 2 times x minus 2. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other one as well. I'm going to set up 6, and then we'll go back and solve 5 and then 6. So y minus negative 4 equals negative 3 times x minus 5. Then we are distributing. So y minus 1 equals negative 3 over 2x plus 3. Double check your math. Some of you were getting 3, but not positive 3. Just double check that in the calculator. Or some of you were getting a positive answer, but it wasn't 3. Just double check that math in your calculator. And then add 1 to both sides. So y equals negative 3 over 2x plus 4 was our final answer for that one. So we're multiplying this times x, so that this becomes negative 3 over 2x. This part you could do in the calculator. But what's happening is negative 3 times negative 2, which becomes a positive 6. Positive 6 over 2 gives us the positive 2. Okay. Then for number 6, you would have to change this to a plus before you do anything. And then you can also distribute. Some of you weren't making that a plus, which changed the rest of your answer, so be careful with that. And then subtract 4 on both sides. So y equals negative 3x plus 11 was your final answer. Do we have questions on 5 or 6? Seven and 8 are similar, except now we're doing perpendicular. So for number 7, because the slope is perpendicular, we're going to take this number and flip it. And it was already negative, so we're going to make it positive. Get rid of the y-intercept because we don't need it. And then do the same work we did before. Y minus 5 equals 1/4 x. Sorry, 1/4 times x minus 4. Distribute, and then solve for y. Double check your math. Some of you got 1 but not negative, or some of you got 4. Just double check that math. Then add 5 to both sides. So that y equals 1/4 x plus 4 is your final answer there. Questions on 7? Number 8 can be done with work or without work. So if this is perpendicular, you have to know what this slope is, which is undefined. You also have to know what the opposite slope would be, which is 0. If you were doing the work, you would put 0 in like normal. Y minus 2 equals 0 times x minus 2. Some of you got that far. But if you're multiplying 0 to everything, it just becomes 0. There's nothing left on the right side except 0. And then you would just add 2 on both sides. So y equals 2 would be our final answer. Without work, you would still have to know that this slope is undefined, so the opposite is 0. The only equation with a 0 slope is a y equals. Look at your ordered pair, find your y value, and that would be your equation, y equals 2. Yes?
I put down y equals 0 and you gave me half.
Because you have the right type of equation, but not the right answer. Oh, 8 was only worth 1 point, not 2. Okay, questions on 8? For 9, you had to find the original slope and y-intercept, or at least the slope. Because the y-intercept is pretty visible. And then after that, you have to find an equation that is parallel to the original and one that is perpendicular. So for parallel, it has to be the same slope, but the y-intercept has to be different. So it can be the negative version, it can be some other number. It just cannot be positive 2. And then for the perpendicular version, we're going to take this slope and flip it. If it was negative, make it positive. And then you can pick the same y-intercept, a different y-intercept, doesn't matter. So 9 was worth 3 points, A, B, and then the original slope or slope and y-intercept. Questions on that one?
On my paper, you wrote 0.75 3 times on that equation. But
What was your slope that you put down?
I mean, I had a negative, or I put a positive.
That's why. Because the original wasn't positive, it was negative, which means your parallel isn't right because you put a...
Is that
Yeah, so instead of the full point, you got 75 point. Because it's 3 points. 1, 2, 3. So you got it wrong each time. Other questions? For the next page, starting with 11, 12, and 13, I will do those in the calculator again. You can follow along as I do those for extra practice, but don't feel like you have to follow along in the calculator. Reset. Second plus 7, 1, 2. Number 10, you had to find which one matched this the best. This has a negative slope, so it can't be A, it can't be C. The only one that has a -3 slope was B. So that one was worth 1 point. For 11, that was worth 2 points. Writing down your line of best fit, even though that's not what it asked for the actual answer. That way, if your answer was wrong, I could see, is it because your equation or something else? So let's do that. If you have your line of best fit instructions, you can also take that out. We would go into steps. I'm going to move a little bit fast, so if you miss steps, you can follow your own instructions. Edit, and I'm going to put in all of my values. If there's something there and you didn't reset, you can go up to the top and hit clear.
You do second. Second 7 plus. She just told me how to do it. I just did it.
7, 1, 2, second plus 7, 1, 2.
I mean, yeah.
So after you have in all of your data, you're going to go to your second step, stat. Scroll to the right to calculate. Down to number 4. Scroll down to store regression equation. Hit alpha trace. And then enter until your screen changes. So you needed to write down this equation. Some of you wrote this down but then started to round. Some of the rounding was fine. If you didn't round, that was also okay. If you put all the decimals, that was also fine. So negative 12.13 was fine. 0.12 was fine. 0.1 was fine. But if you didn't put any decimals at all, that was rounding too much. So make sure you have some of the decimals. So somewhere near your problem, write your equation. And then the question asks to find the closest length of time it should take the niece, the 15-year-old niece, to run 1 lap. So we're going to store 15 in for x, your step 3. So from this screen, I'm going to go into 15, just type 15. STOX, enter. And then grab your equation from alpha trace and hit enter. Again, rounding was fine. So 90.39 was fine, 90.4 was fine, 91 was too much. Or 90 was too much. 90.3 was also fine. You also needed to put what we were looking for. So seconds, be specific. Questions on 11?
You don't have to get A's for it about AFDA. You can get like a B result and then make it up like an AFDA. You just have to do like, you did like you did B squared or C squared and get back to grade.
412, same thing, but these are years, so you have to change them. The first is always 0, and then after that is how many years has it been since? So when we put in this data, it should be 0, 4, 6, 7, 8 instead of 2000 and all of those. If you use the years instead of those numbers, you ended up with a different equation. Same answer, but different equation. So just be careful with that. I'm going to go back into stat, go back into edit, clear this out. By going up to the top, hit clear and come back down, and then put these values in.
How do you get like the numbers from the side, like the 0, 2, 4, 6? Are you counting by like from 2000?
No, the first year is always 0, and then every year after that is how many years since it's been from the original, which is happens to be 4, 6, 7, 8. Once you have in your data, you go on to step 2. Stat, scroll over to calculate, down to number 4. Scroll down to store regression equation, alpha trace, and enter until your screen changes. Again, rounding here was fine. All of the decimals were fine. 0.09 is good. 0.08 is fine. 0.1 is too much. And then also, just rounding this up to 1 is too much. 7.10 is fine, but just 7 is not, so be careful with your rounding. And then we're going to use that equation to answer the question. We're looking for the population in 2020. So since the original, that would be 20 years later. So we're going to store that value in for x. So I'm going to type in 20, STO, x, enter. And then grab our equation from alpha trace. 8.84 was fine, 8.8 was fine, 9 was too much.
What did you get for your the line drag?
This is rounded, but yes.
Because when I did it, my B was 7.2. So I think I tried to
and then be specific. So in millions, talking about the population, something. And then interpolation does this fall within the data or outside of the data? The answer is outside of the data, so extrapolation. So this problem was worth 3 points, 1 for the line best fit, 1 for the answer, 1 for this. Everything else was, you could get partial credit. This was all or nothing, so you had to know whether that was extrapolation or interpolation or not. Questions on 12? Yeah. So it's just looking at this number. Does this fall within the data or outside of the data? So outside would be extrapolation. Inside, like if it said 2005, that would be interpolation. Okay. And then 13, you just had to find the equation. So do this one more time. Stat, edit, clear out your list, start putting in your data. Be careful with your decimals. then go back into your step 2. Stat, scroll over to calculate, number 4. You don't even have to store it for this one because it didn't ask you to find values, so you can just calculate it. So y equals 29.41, x minus 162.01. Was your final answer, and that one was worth 1 point. Questions on 13. On to the last. So with these majority, you have to define your variables, find your equation, find your answer, show me how you solved it. So for 14, you see the word per, that's your M. You see anything where it's only being charged once, an entrance fee, an admission fee, a deposit, initial fee, anything like that, that's your B. And if you're given M and B, that means you're given X/Y, one or the other. You have to find the other. If you're not sure which is which, we have total cost, we have hours. Then ask yourself, would hours depend on total cost? Would total cost depend on hours? Total cost would depend on hours. Whatever depends on the other is your Y. That means your hours would be your X. And if I counted how many hours that would be, it's 5.5. So then you have your Y, your M, your X, your B. You can write your equation. This, doing that part, was worth 1 point. We don't know our Y. We know our M. We know our X. And we know our B. That would be our equation. Because you can put that in the calculator and do that all at the same time, I wasn't really looking for work here. If you showed it, that was great. And then get your solution. So that one was worth 3 points. Questions on that one? For 15, it's similar. You have something that says per, so that's M. Here it says something about a one-time fee, so that's your B. And then we have X and Y. Technically, this is the type where you can use point slope, but if you didn't do that, that's okay. Again, if you're not sure which is X, which is Y, would number of games depend on cost? Would cost depend on number of games? Cost would depend on number of games. So then we can start writing our equation. You know, our Y is 47. Our M is 5.95. Our X is 7, and we don't know B. If you use the point slope, I gave you credit for that. If you didn't and used this, I gave you credit for that, if it was correct. And then we're solving. So multiply, subtract. And then get your final answer. Make sure you are labeling whatever the solution is. Both of these we're looking for a cost, so your labeling would be dollars. Questions on that one? $16, you have to recognize what you're given. Here we're given square footage and we're given the cost of that square footage. And then again, because the amount of square footage directly affects the cost, that's like an input-output situation. So this would be X and Y. It means you're not given M, you're not given B. So then you have two choices. One, do everything algebraically. Find your slope like you would normally. Use that with one of these ordered pairs to find your y-intercept. Use that equation to find the answer to this last part. Some of you did some of that. Some of you found the slope and found the equation. Some of your slopes weren't correct, which messed up the equation, but then didn't actually answer the last part. Or you can use your calculator steps to find your line of best fit. I'm going to do that for the sake of time. So I'm going to go back into stat edit and clear out my list. And then I'm going to put my X's or my square footage in L1. And my monthly rent or cost to rent in L2. It's nice because there's only like 4 things you have to put in instead of like a whole list of numbers. And then go on to your step 2, stat, scroll over to calculate, number 4, scroll down, hit alpha trace, enter till your screen changes. So if you did this algebraically, you would have gotten a fraction, like 16 over 25, which some of you were close, but not quite. This would be the same, 0.64, and that fraction would be the same. And then you would just tell me that you use your line of best fit. That would be you showing work. Because otherwise I don't know how you got the equation. Then you have another choice. You have your equation. You have to find the monthly rent for this square footage. You can do it by hand at that point or still use your calculator. So from here I'm going to store 1200 as X, 1200 as TOX. And then grab my equation from alpha trace. 1396 should have been your final answer. And you would just say that you stored that value as X. That would be you showing your work. So this was worth 4 points, 1 for defining your variables, 1 for your equation, your solution, and then either doing this algebraically or doing this in the calculator and writing those words. Questions on 16? Okay, awesome. For this one, because we're talking about nickels and dimes, the nickels and dimes have no effect on each other. We're comparing 2 different things. You have to use a different equation. Some of you were still trying to use y equals mx plus b, but that wouldn't work here. Your c is always your total, so that's the easiest to find. Your a and b are usually what's given. You're not given these because it's assumed information. Of what they're worth. So somewhere you would have to write that. Your x and your y would relate to your a and b. So x has to relate to a, y has to relate to b. So x would be something about nickels, the number of nickels. And then y would be your number of dimes. So that would be you defining your variables. And then from there we can write our equation. 0.05 x plus 0.10 times our 46 equals 5.45. So that would be your equation in the box below. And then we can solve. Be careful with your equation. Some of you were putting 10 instead of 0.10, which made you get hundreds instead of decimals. You got weird. Same thing with 0.05. Some of you were putting just 0.5, so double check those. As we're solving, make sure you're not losing your decimals. Then you could have 460 instead of $4.60, and your answers can become real weird. And then divide. $17 was your final answer. So that one was also worth 4 points. Do you have any questions on that one? Okay. So I'm going to give you guys a choice. 1, you take the test as scheduled today. Next class we move on. Next Wednesday is our flex day, so it would give me a chance to grade it over the weekend, get it back to you. You'd have time to work on retake stuff if needed next Wednesday. Or you use today as your flex day to practice more. You take your test Friday. Because today is a flex day, we won't have a flex day next week. Your next flex day wouldn't be until the end of November, so you'd have to come before or after school to do retakes. So take the test today, flex day next Wednesday, or flex day today, not again until the end of November, and test on Friday. I'll give you like a minute, talk over with each other. Yes. You can work on any review you have. Khan Academy's, your review, go back to the quiz, anything like that. For this, so that you can start the retake work for this marking period, for the second marking period. I want the second marking period. As you are talking amongst yourself, listen, so if it is majority flex day today, and you still want to take your test, you'll have that option. If it is majority take your test, everyone's going to at least start the test and then could finish it during flex day. Alright? So, who all wants to take their test today? That's fine.
Stop.
Okay. So, you guys can still take your test. Everyone else will be working on flex stuff. So, that does not mean be on your phone, on TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, all the things you guys get on. That means actively use this time to practice the things that you aren't 100% on. So you can work on your review, go back to your old notes, go back to your Khan Academy, there's Delta Math. If you want to redo your quiz, if you need additional practice more than that, I can get that to you. Those of you that want to take your test, I can get that for you. Give me a second.